Hello and welcome back. In the last lecture, we briefly spoke about inheritance. Let's look at it in a little bit more detail. So we have our user class, which we've been working on. And if I pull up the model that we had based this on, right here, we have the seller, buyer, and administrator classes, which subclass from the user class or inherit from it. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this. How do we do that? First, so over here, I'm going to say class buyer and then left arrow for subclass from user. Okay. Similarly, class seller subclass from user, and then class admin subclass from user as well. All right. Now remember how we have this method that says run? So let's create a couple of objects based on these classes and run the run method on them and see if it works. Okay. Now over here, I'll leave this there. I'll say buyer1 equals buyer.new, and I'll say John Doe, and then John Doe at example.com, and then I'll say buyer1.run. Let's see if that works. I'm going to say Ruby user.rb. Okay, see how it says, hey, I'm running? That's John Doe. Okay, so I was able to inherit into my buyer class from the user class the instance method run. Now, what if I want to change this method? What if I want to change how the buyer treats the run method, whereas I want to keep the seller and admin using the same run method as the user? How do I do that? First, I will create two more buyers. So I'll paste it twice. I'll make this seller1 equals seller.new John Doe 1 John Doe 1, and over here I'll say admin1 admin.new John Doe 2 John Doe 2. Okay, now all three are going to run. If I run it the first time, it says, hey, I'm running 3 times. Now let me go ahead and update this method within buyer. So if I do define run end and say puts, hey, I am not running and I'm in buyer class, save that, run this. Okay, so all three of them are showing this. Okay, I know what happened. If you look back here, I've written seller1, but then I'm making buyer1 run. I have to update this to seller1, and I have to update this to admin1. Save that. Let me run it again. Okay, notice how now the buyer is the only one who's running and saying that I'm in buyer class, whereas the other two are simply running. Okay? So that's inheritance for you. Now, one last thing I want to do is I want to show you the ancestors. So if I type in puts buyer.ancestors, save that, run this. Notice how buyer, then it's user, then it's object. So the hierarchy updates. Remember, user had object kernel basic object. Well, here buyer has user before object kernel basic object. All right. Now let's look at one more thing for classes before we move on to modules. And that is a class method. Okay. So far, we've been dealing with instance methods, which for example are here we have run, here we have run also. What is a class method? A class method can be called directly on the class without instantiating any objects. To have this run method run, we have to instantiate or initiate an object, right? We have to create a new object and work within that. For a class method, we don't need to do that. We can call it directly. For example, here we can just say define some class method and end. The way you call a class method is you say self dot and then the method name. So we'll just call it identify yourself, and you can say put hey, I am a class method. Save that. So let's run this. I'm literally going to call the class directly. So I'll say user dot identify yourself. Save that. Let's run this. Check it out. Hey, I'm a class method. I was able to do it without initiating any objects. All right. And if you don't believe me, I'm just going to get rid of all of this. Save that. Run this. There it is. Hey, I'm a class method. No objects, yet I was able to access a method within the class. Now that's a class method. Okay? All right, now moving on to modules. So what is a module? A module is similar to a class, but it basically is a collection of behaviors that other classes can use via mixins. Okay? So you have to include the module in the class that you want to use. But you cannot have an object of a module, okay? You cannot initiate an instance variable of a module or anything. A module has to be mixed in to a class, and then you can use the methods in a module. So let's take a look at it real quick. So let's say we have a module and we'll say destructible, okay? And if you're wondering why the able, it's because by naming convention, modules, if possible, would be named ending with an able. So if you had a module for walk, for example, you would have it named as walkable. All right. So module destructible, I'm going to say define destroy, and then I'll give it any object and say put I will destroy the object. Okay. Now, if I want to use this method that this module destructible provides over here, let's say in my user class, I have to include it. Otherwise, I won't have access to this destroy method. So let me create a new instance of user. So user equals user.new. Name, I'll say Masroor, and email, I'll say masroor@example.com. Now, if I try user.destroy, and I'll say my name, save that. Let's see if it works. Undefined method destroy for user, okay? So this method is not accessible by user. But if I do something like this, if I just add include destructible, oops, I have an error there. Destructible, save that. If I run this again, I will destroy the object. There you go. Now you have access within the user class to the methods in the destructible module. All right. So you can have multiple methods in your module, and then as soon as you include that module within your class, you have access to all of those methods. And then your objects will have access to those methods as well. Okay, great. Now at this point, I would recommend you look up some methods, classes, and modules in Ruby by visiting the ruby-lang.org site and just read through some of them and try understanding as much as you can, okay? Don't spend more than 30 minutes to an hour, and try to make notes of what you've read just so you can refer back to them at some point, and also that you remember what you've gone through. Okay, great. Now in the next video, we'll build our final project for Ruby and wrap up section 2. See you there.